Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Paul Woblington. That's Ian Boyd, joined by Deep Dive mascot Izzy. Also, that's Ian's daughter. We didn't just take a child and make it our mascot. That wouldn't be appropriate. Hey, we're going to talk about the Texas OU rivalry, of course, because there is no other game that matters to Texas or OU fans this weekend, or college football fans, maybe other than Ohio State, Oregon. But we'll let you decide on that. Hey, what we want you to definitely decide on is make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and go join Inside Texas with the promo code IT1. For $1 American, you'll get 2 months. That is known as a deal, ladies and gentlemen. We got another deal for you. We're going to talk about this rivalry, and we're going to talk about it from a deep dive perspective of the interplay of what makes this rivalry so unique. We know the intensity of it. If anyone's ever attended it, you feel the goosebumps when the teams run out of the tunnel. We're going to talk about the neutral site. We're going to talk about the fact that it's the time of year that's also relevant. It's not an end of year game as so many rivalries are. And then we're going to talk about the fact that intensity interplays with wrinkles and adjustments, which have always proven so important in this rivalry. So we're going to have a little bit of a perspective on that and what makes it so unique. And we're going to begin by talking about the record of Texas coaches in this rivalry. Because if you're of a certain age as a Texas fan, you may not know this, Ian. I'm a little bit older than you, but when you enter the sort of the modern era or the era of college football, when it really entered the national consciousness at the same time as pro football going on television and all that, that's the hire of Darrell Royal for the University of Texas. That was a fortuitous thing for Texas because, of course, Royal won 3 national titles and established the Texas football brand. 12-7-1 against OU. Fred Akers, his successor, 5-4-1 against OU, against some very good OU teams, by the way. McWilliams and Makovic, not very successful at UT, and total winning records against OU. So between 1957 and 1997, Ian, it was understood that Texas would probably get the better of OU in the series. The worm turned, and my argument is that there was an aberration to the series that was introduced in 1998. What are your thoughts so far on when you see this graphic?
I hope that you're right, and I think you might be. I don't want to get us off on too much of a tangent, but I wonder if joining the SEC is going to be what turns the worm in a long term, where Texas is more consistently on top in this game. Of course, they joined the SEC because leadership changed. So
yeah, leadership is important, whether in this rivalry or the direction of your university or its athletic department. And OU, I think, has benefited recently with pretty darn good leadership, at least at the athletic department level, with Castiglione. I think he's done a pretty good job, and I think that's one of the differentiators in their program and why it's sustained. I do agree that the SEC will be a turning point, in part because, my theory, Texas is at its best when it's challenged. And I'd always chide the Texas fans who would say, "Oh, why don't we stay in the Big 12? It's an easier path to the playoff or the national title." And of course, the answer is because we're not challenged. We're not facing existential threats and humiliation quite the way that you are in the SEC. And that weaponizes Texas. When we're challenged as a university, we do good stuff. When we get complacent and slothful, it gets pretty ugly. So that's always been sort of my grand theory. But what's interesting here, Ian, that I also want to point out is between 1957 and 1997, when Texas played OU, intensity, preparation, and physicality were assumed on both sides.
yeah.
The idea that you would ever come out unprepared or not ready to play, or it's just another game, as disparate of personalities as Royal, Akers, McWilliams, and Makovic, at some level understood this was not just another game. Mac Brown comes in, and here's the great irony for Texas fans, Ian. He restores and revives Texas football. Arguably between 2000 and 2009, Texas football is the program in the nation in terms of just winning and of course a national title and almost another national title in 2009. But at the same time, he can't deal, and I mean Mac Brown, with an athletic peer in a rivalry game, specifically OU. Why?
I think that's the perfect setup for what we're going to discuss in this show.
Yep.
It's because I think this game is unique from any other game played in college football for the reasons that we're about to get into. And I think that was extremely hard for Mac to understand. I think he eventually got it in the late 2000s. And then I don't know what happened in the early 2010s. I mean, everything was kind of, he probably just ran out of juice, honestly, right?
Yeah, he got it. He got it good. yeah. I'll let you guys interpret that however you like. But one of the things that is unique is the fact of the time of year and the fact that it's at a neutral site. So let's talk about the time of year, Ian. Why is it remarkable or important that it's in the middle of the year in October rather than the end of the year as so many rivalries are?
There's a couple things. One is that you don't have a year's worth of film on your opponent. I used to think of this game as being like, this is basically a playoff game. It just takes place earlier in the year. And playoff games are different. Like when you get into the playoffs, a lot of coaches don't really seem to understand this. A lot of commentators don't seem to understand this. The game planning and the way that teams play to their matchups in postseason games of college football or the NFL is totally different. The level of intensity of preparation and just like how much teams like just game plan it like very carefully. Like, okay, we're going to make them beat us this way or this way. And here's how we're going to achieve that is different. So I was like, the Red River Shootout is basically that in the middle of the year, but it's not, because the other wrinkle is that because of the time of year, a lot of these two teams often don't know who they are until they leave the stadium.
Yes. So I agree. I think of it as a diagnostic.
Yes.
You have this new car. So college football every year in August or in the spring, however you want to talk about it, you get this new car. You trade in your old model. And you might have loved the old model, or maybe you didn't like the old model very much, but you get a new car. And you get to kind of build out that car the way you want. You get to trick out your ride, right? And then you cruise through, hopefully, the early part of the year, if it's a good ride. And then you got to run a diagnostic. And the OU game, you go into the garage and you're like, I didn't even know that was a problem. I didn't have a check engine light on that. But holy cow, we can't defend this, or we can't do this route, or we can't run the ball at all if a team does this. And OU's had similar reactions on their side. But I always thought of it that way. It's like a playoff check diagnostic. And if you pass, it's sort of pass-fail. If you pass, boy, the world is your oyster, and we can sit there and envision all sorts of scenarios. If you fail, it's the end of the world, and you're never going to win another football game, which, of course, is not true, but that's how you feel walking out of that stadium. What about
you'll recall that going into the playoffs last year, the fact that Texas lost this game was a big reason why I was like, I just don't think this is a national championship team.
Yeah. You were very, I think, prescient in that regard. I was very into the X's and O's of Washington, of like, we need to be running a dime against these guys and like experiment with a light front and, really double cover. And you're like, hey man, I think it's like, we're not ready. Just broadly. and my proof is OU. And I was like, well, it's probably a good point as well. I probably could have just done that and saved myself some thinking and time. All right. Well, I want to talk about the fact that it's a neutral site, because I think that's very impactful. First of all, it makes the game incredibly cool, both visually and audibly. I was talking to my co-host Randy Boone on the Everyone Gets a Trophy podcast, which you guys can find on Spotify and Apple. And he was laughing because he's often outside the stadium with his family. They own some of the concessions nearby. Oh. And he says, you hear a crazy roar up from the crowd. And you're like, oh, it must have been a touchdown, because they're slightly ahead of the broadcast. And it's like a 4-yard run. But that was just like kind of hard running where a guy broke a tackle. But that's the level of intensity. But it also speaks to the neutral site. Everything elicits an emotion. Everything gets a reaction from the crowd. And you could hear it. It's the famous tunnel video as the Texas players are running out. Boo! And then they get to the 50 and it's like, yeah, Texas. And that's what OU is experiencing. There's certain sides of the stadium of if you got to go into the red zone, you might as well be in the middle of Oklahoma, right? But then there's other times where you might as well be in the middle of Texas and you can't even get a signal in, right? I think that neutral site is huge. And I think that the most analogous game in that regard is Army-Navy, because they're both obsessed with each other. No one would ever, at Army or Navy, I can assure you, as a father who's a West Point grad, no one would ever say, I kind of actually think Air Force is our rival, right? That's not a thing. It's beat Army, beat Navy all year long. And most Texas fans, I can't speak for all, I think they view OU as the great existential threat to Texas football. And I think OU fans feel similarly. So yes. I think the neutral site plays into that, because think of the other great rivalries, Ian. Auburn, Alabama, the Iron Bowl, very intense football game. When Alabama plays at home, they beat the crap out of Auburn. When Auburn plays at home, sometimes they stun Alabama. But that's a very different dynamic from a true neutral split down the 50. Half orange, half maroon. At the 50, there's like fistfights. Like the night before, at least when I was a student, there's fistfights all over Commerce Street. And, you know, depending on how many fights the Texas fans or OU fans won, you kind of had an indicator of the game the next day. So I think that's probably calmed down, which is probably good. But I just think the neutral site makes this special and makes it prone to weird momentum shifts in ways that other rivalry games are not. What do you think?
You can see it. Like since Mac left, the game has gone back to being both teams go in ready to like bludgeon each other to death with their whatever's at hand, you know. You watch this game and the swings are insane.
Yeah.
And you see the impact. You see like the guys make the uncharacteristic mistakes. You see the big rivalry hits. You see like one team just like look like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to get out of here alive. And the other team's on top of the world. And then something happens a minute later, and then on the other way, and then all of a sudden the defeated team is completely buoyed, right?
Yes.
When they're on top of the world, it's unbelievable. Like the older I get, and the more I notice like the body language and the swings of it. Also, you know, Mac not coaching one side, the more obvious it gets. Like, oh my gosh! And then also, obviously, if you're there, even watching from home. Watching from home, you feel it, because
you can see the body language in the stands is even exaggerated versus a normal game. Meaning, if you and I are at a Texas game and we're playing Mississippi State and Jaden Blue puts the ball on the carpet, you and I both look at each other and go, right? At OU, we both go, no! like
it's happening again.
Hyper. Yes. And it's the worst thing that's ever happened, and we'll never recover. And then a play later, the OU quarterback gets sacked, and it's like, we're going to crush them. So, yeah, I think that plays into it, the neutral site, the time of year. But also, time of year factors into something else. You know, the housing market, Ian. Sometimes you got to get out there in the fall or in the winter and find the best deals. And the guy who's going to help you find the best deals is Gabe Winslow. You can reach him at 832-557-1095. If you're driving your car right now, listening to this podcast, pull over and write down that number, 832-557-1095. Why should you call Gabe? Over 20 years in the industry, fantastic at what he does, absolutely sharp as a razor. He's got a law degree, former National Merit Scholar. He's just really, really good at this. And he's also a really good dude. So he's a guy you want to trust with this. I can assure you this is an industry with a wide range of ability. It would be the diplomatic way of expressing this. Gabe is at the very top, and the numbers prove it. There's so many satisfied. Everyone gets a trophy listeners, and of course, Inside Texas YouTube channel watchers who've used him and just raved about his service. Don't believe us? Give him a call. 832-557-1095. Tell him Izzy sent you, and he'll know. He'll know. All right. Here's something else we need to know. We need to talk about this crazy interplay of this rivalry between the intensity of the rivalry that we just talked about and the fact that Texas and OU coaches, more recently, OU coaches, have always loved to introduce or hold back a new wrinkle. And how does that new wrinkle interplay with the emotions intensity of this game? Because when you feel this urgency, when you encounter something novel on that field, it feels very different than when you encounter Kentucky is showing a different front and you're at DKR and you had a bad series and you walk off and the O-line coach with his whiteboard says, hey, we just need to do this, guys. It's a different feeling at Texas OU when they introduce a new wrinkle and it goes for 60. Talk to me about this interplay between the pure intensity of the game, but also the fact that coaches like to hold back adjustments.
Let me say one more thing about intensity.
Bring it.
One thing we would hear, maybe you told this story or somebody else, I can't remember, but I think maybe Mac or somebody had NFL players come back and visit Texas guys and speak in the locker room, and they would speak to like, what's it like in the NFL? And they'd be like, in the NFL, it's like the Red River Shootout every game. Where it's like, that guy's like fighting for his paycheck and his family.
Yep.
And that level of intensity, also probably the parity is probably similar, because like most of the time Texas goes and the other team does not have the athletes and the size that Texas has. We'll see in the SEC that'll change a little bit, but then you'd play OU and it'd be like, oh, they have guys too. So yeah, I mean, well, you put it really well in your introduction there. Teams, especially in the Big 12, it may be a little different now, but Texas and Oklahoma would routinely hold back like massive components to their team strategy for the game and then be like, just drop it. And they, every year you hear the same BS from the coaches. Like Venables is like, it was good to have the off week and focus on us.
Right.
And Sark in the Texas report was kind of like, hey, Sark in Texas was actually able to prepare for Oklahoma in the bye week. And it's like, I've seen the Bob Stoops playbook from the 2000s, and it's work on Texas for a day of every week before the game. Like they are routinely practicing stuff against each other that they're not even going to use until they play each other. And then after the game, it may be like a mainstay strategy, but until the game, it stays under wraps. And so, I mean, we could get into like a million different examples if you want.
Let's do that. Can you name some examples? I think a lot of us can name OU wrinkles because we felt them, but name some of the examples of Texas introducing wrinkles. Maybe a guy named Jordan Shipley.
Yeah, Jordan Shipley as a tight end in 2008 was enormous. Oklahoma fans will look back and say like, well, our middle linebacker, Ryan Reynolds, not Deadpool, but another guy.
If they had Deadpool playing for them, because he does wear a red suit, that would have been really impressive.
Ryan Reynolds would not have fared any better than this Ryan Reynolds. He like blew out his knee during the game. And then Oklahoma was scrambling both to replace him and then also to handle the adjustment. I think Texas also waited till like the third series to do it.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know if it was like a break class in case of emergency or if they just were like, let's let them use up their opening defensive script and then get it out. I don't know. But they'll be like, well, Ryan Reynolds tore his knee or else we would have been fine. No. Ryan Reynolds was getting worked by Shipley. And that's part of the reason why he blew out his knee. Is because they were just completely unprepared for it. And Brent Venables tried like 4 different adjustments.
Good reminder that Brent Venables at that time was the Oklahoma DC.
Yeah.
Before becoming the fall guy, sort of there, and then ending up having incredible success at Clemson. So kind of strange how that went full circle.
And then the following year, Texas tried to go back to it. And Venables had been saving up a 4-1-6 dime package.
Yep.
Removed their, well, maybe not worth explaining everything, but he was ready the following year. and Texas had to get into
quarterback run game.
They had to get into 5 wide in order to find a linebacker to attack in coverage. They had some like weird reverse stuff in that game. Texas ended up kind of leaning on them in the run game and pulling it out. But it was like, what was it, 16-13?
Yep.
I'll
give you an example of an ultimate Texas wrinkle that threw OU for a curve. The wishbone. Texas introduced that and won in 1969 by, I think, 10 points. And then in 70, I think they blew OU out. I mean, pretty badly. And Texas had an incredible team. So it's not like OU quit, but they combined an incredible team with intensity with this wrinkle that OU had not quite grasped. And as Texas fans, we've been on the other end of that. And that's how the score gets out of hand in this rivalry. Talent advantage, wrinkle, intensity. Bake it all together, and one of the teams freaks out and loses their composure, which is what used to always happen in the Super Bowls. If you guys, Super Bowls are no longer like that. But it used to be one of the teams was typically better than the other and then had some other advantages, and then the other team would panic and get blown out. Doesn't happen anymore, but that is kind of the way it happens with that rivalry meets intensity meets wrinkle. Interestingly, though,
that sort of happened in McVay.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, true. But I will say, interestingly, OU and Texas, when one team innovates, the other either adjusts or is a fast follower. I mean, what I mean by that is OU, God bless Darryl Royal, but being the old school coaching gentleman that he was, he told his coordinator to teach OU the wishbone because that's what gentlemanly coaches did back in the day. If a coach asked you for help, you said yes. And so OU learned the wishbone, adopted it, and you know what they did? They plugged in better athletes than Texas had, and then used that to boat race us a couple of times before Texas then adjusted. And then you fought these incredible, typical Texas OU games of that era, which was just incredibly physical, knockdown, drag out. Also, OU fans who may be watching, welcome. But you may not know this, and some Texas fans may not know this. I know during the Mac Brown era, you had the whole Texas is soft thing, which, whether true or not, was a deep OU belief that gave them confidence.
They still have
that. The baseline of Texas football was caveman physical football. Like the idea of saying Texas was soft about Texas teams in the 70s or early 80s was like laughable, or even DKR teams. Like these guys were iron-willed. I will run into the wall until the wall breaks, and I don't care that there's a door. Taking the door is cowardly. So that's another aspect of this rivalry that I think if you don't have a historical understanding, old Texas OU was literally a fight in a parking lot. I mean, there was not a lot of nuance in a lot of these games.
Even I believe Bud Wilkinson was one of the first to build his teams by like targeting working class sons in like the oil fields. And DKR was his quarterback, right? And also
quarterback. I think DKR played in he might have played. He played quarterback too, didn't he? He played in the secondary. I think that's where he was his best position.
I don't remember. And I believe he was an assistant there as well, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean he's an OU boy through and through.
And then that's the approach that he brought to building Texas's rosters.
Yeah.
And then Barry Switzer was somehow a leading light on integration. Right? Yep. And that led to Texas making that adjustment. More recently, and less significantly, Brand Venables surprised Texas with the 4 down, 3 high, 3rd down defense in last year's Red River Shootout, and discombobulated Ewers for a few series. And then now that's the base 3rd down package for Texas a year later.
That's exactly what we're talking about. So as much as both fan bases despise each other, as much as both programs dislike each other, they steal from each other all the time. And I mean, one of the great golden ages of OU football was built and promulgated on Texas's gentlemanly coaching staff teaching them the wishbone. And then OU took it and improved upon it, right? OU then later under Mike Leach and under his successors, introduced Texas to the idea of the spread offense, right? In a real way. Greg Davis obviously had some of those influences, but you could see its influence on Texas as with the Jordan Shipley 4-wide thing, right? We really embraced it and went from more of a pro set, eye back team, handing the ball off to Ricky Williams and Hodges Mitchell, right, with a fullback. That went away. Vince Young, the ultimate evolution of that. So I think you have to have some understanding broadly that these two programs are intertwined. So why did they go to the SEC together? For just this reason. These programs are it's the Joker and Batman, right? Batman's like, you're a psychopath who wants to kill me. And Joker's like, I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? Right? He gives him meaning in his life, like tormenting this guy, right? And that's kind of how OU and Texas are. So, Ian, any parting thoughts on the uniqueness and intensity and wrinkles and all this that go into this rivalry and this hatred?
This is why the game is often just a slobber knocker, even when one team is advantaged over the other.
Yeah.
Let's end on this. Do you think this year Oklahoma will find something within themselves and measure up like Texas did like in 2017? Texas was not a good team in 2017, but Sam Ehlinger ran the ball for 100 yards and they played good defense. There's been a couple other years like that. 2015, Texas somehow won this game.
Well, I mean, 2015 is the parallel in the sense that Hawkins can be their Gerard Hurd, probably an upgraded version. But did they, in 2 weeks, were they able to get enough Navy and Army tape to install a bunch of quarterback run game and counters and backfield eye candy to occupy our linebackers, get a good play side double team, and see if you can grind on the Texas defense? And will the Texas defense consent to that? Which is, well, they're not hitting big plays. We can endure this. You know, they're not scoring. Hey, I think Ian and I are on the same page here. When you have certain matchups, kill the flowers before they bloom.
Yes, we're totally on the same page with this.
That's right. So yeah. I think Texas has to bring it. And if they can, I think eventually Texas is going to find what Venables is hiding. And I think what smart OU fans know Venables is hiding, which is subpar cornerback and subpar nickel play. The nickel play is not their fault. They lost a really good player in Dolby. Cornerback, I think, is more their fault, even though they lost Gentry. I don't think he was this massive upgrade. But eventually, Sark is going to hunt those matchups out. The question is, can Venables, like last year, steal some possessions, steal the initiative, steal momentum, and make this a football game? And that's what OU has shown a knack for doing when they have the lesser team. Texas has also shown a knack for doing that. Texas have not had a good record over the last 11 years, Ian. They're 3-8, but 8 of those losses, or 7 of the 8 losses by a score or less, 4 of those games decided in the last play or the last 30 seconds of the football game. And I think people, even OU fans, would admit most of those games they had the superior team. And I think last year, whether they think that or not, I think you and I think Texas had the better team, but still came up short. So it's an interesting rivalry. I think it's uniqueness. There's just not anything really like it for the reasons we mentioned. So I'm always looking forward to it. At the same time, a little nervous and sick to my stomach about it. Ian, what are your parting thoughts before we bid adieu?
I don't think Oklahoma is in a place on offense where they can measure up. I think they're too sick and too disorganized to put something together. Like we both have the same basic game plan on their behalf.
Yeah.
And then we're like, we'll see if PK just tries to rope-a-dope it and absorb punches, or if he just gets after it from the beginning and shuts it down. I don't know. We'll see. The fact that Nansen is around is helpful. The fact that they already showed the rope-a-dope strategy against Mississippi State makes me wonder if they were saving the aggressive strategy. But in either event, I just have the suspicion that Oklahoma is just not up for this.
Well,
and I could look very dumb for thinking that. But
look, prognosticators in the series often look foolish because we can't account for so many of the things we just covered. But I'll say this. It used to sort of be a given for me that OU would have a baseline of execution on the offensive line. And that's not the case. And I think even critical Sooner fans understand that at a base level. And that's a dynamic we've not seen in a while because Biedenbow has done a really good job. He's not done a good job the last couple of years. And this year, a lot of chickens came home to roost for them there. So we put the emphasis on Hawkins. We put the emphasis on their receivers not getting separation. We put the emphasis on their running backs not having explosiveness. But I wonder if that O-line is ultimately what does them in and encourages PK to freaking bring it from the opening bell.
Yep.
Well, with that encouraging, confidence-inspiring thought, we say goodbye. This has been the Deep Dive. Hey, go join Inside Texas. We've got a flash sale going on. Promo code HOOK'em. You see the details there, 50% off. And hey, if you love what Ian writes and his theorizing, which I do, you can go to America's War Game on his Substack. He has a really cool post up right now, in fact. No Country for Young Quarterbacks. It's worth a read. And of course, if you like hearing my blathering and you want to hear me talking to other people, you can find me on Everyone Gets a Trophy podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, etc. And that's Izzy, who is remaining and will always be the key mascot of this deep dive endeavor. That's Ian Boyd. I'm Paul Wadlington saying, beat the hell out of OU. Hook 'em. Yes.